Hi, I'm Brian, and a couple of nights ago I got the opportunity to see the new film by Kevin Macdonald and Sam Rice-Edwards, 121, featuring John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and what a cracker it is as it documents their 18 months to 2 years living in their Greenwich Village apartment in New York City, but crucially also documenting the events that led up to the 121 concert at Madison Square Gardens, a concert which I didn't know much about before, but I was immediately blown away by this idea, or this fact, shall I say, that this was the only full length concert that John Lennon gave after leaving the Beatles. I mean, wow, what a loss that this great performer, this incredible singer, only did one concert in full. And the directors established their framing device very early on in the film, and that framing device is the TV. And they use juxtaposition so cleverly with archival footage so that we might get what corporations want to welcome into our lounge rooms, like the Sonny and Cher show, as opposed to what the government probably doesn't want coming into our world, which is footage of civil unrest and protests like the Attica State riots in which 43 people were killed. We get this swirling, chaotic, accelerated imagery, and then bam, we're into the concert in New York City by playing on stage John Lennon, the song New York City from the album Sometime in New York City. You kind of get the idea, I suppose. But, what is a good rock song, helped out by Elephant's memory, turns into something else because the fuse is absolutely lit and Lennon sets this song on fire. Quite incredible, the presence of this man on stage in a live concert. Absolutely adore it. And from there, we go to a taped phone conversation between Yoko Ono and David Peel, who was a musician. I mean, John Lennon produced his album, The Pope Smokes Dope, and David Peel was around for the John Sinclair rallies. And this conversation is seen on the screen. So as the participants are talking with any of these phone conversations, we see their dialogue up on one side of the screen, and we're talking about John and Yoko at this point. And on the other, we see the dialogue of whom they're speaking to. And Yoko reveals these horrors of death threats when she came on the scene, and also one day receiving a rubber doll representing her, symbolizing her, with needles stuck all the way through it. Absolutely terrible sort of stuff that was going on at the time. But then we come to a song of reconciliation, a song of coming together, and it is Come Together. Oh my God. And I'm sitting in the audience going, I'm seeing John Lennon on stage playing one of my favorite Beatles songs, and he's looking cool as with his blue glasses on. He's got a Les Paul strapped on. His voice sounds incredible. This is one of the greatest singers you could ever wish to hear. And but having said that, there's a bit in the chorus where he goes, "Come together," right? And his voice breaks on this. So the second time through, he sings it and keeps his voice low, but he goes, "Come together right now, over you." And he goes, "Why don't we change it up a bit?" And the third time through is, "Come together right now, stop the war." Bam! Magnificent song, great version. Absolutely loved that. And then we go into John Sinclair, which is also from the Sometime in New York City album. Now, I used to have this album, and this was my favorite song on it. And I think he's playing a dobro guitar in concert or a resonator. And one of the reasons I really love this is because when he starts to go, got to, 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 got to set him free. I always can't wait until he gets to set him free as I'm singing along. It's sort of like listening to ACD's Jailbreak when he goes, and he made it out, Bon Scott. And there's this huge pause, and the temptation is just to come straight in going, with a bullet it is. Oh, there's my voice breaking. There you go. John, you and I have got something in common. And from there we go to this phone conversation between John and Alan Klein, which I kind of felt was really interesting because I don't think I've ever heard his voice before. So and John's proposing this idea of the Free the People tour, which will go across the states and wind up in Miami at the 1972 Republican Convention. So peaceful protests along the way, but we probably remember what happened at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. But there's this idea of using proceeds and profits from the concerts to give to prisons to release 500 prisoners at each prison, if that makes any sense. And all of this is juxtaposed with the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is very relevant for somebody living in Australia because Mary Tyler Moore was on TV all the time, as was, say, Sonny and Cher before. Anyway, Alan Klein is pouring cold water on this idea. He's trying to talk John Lennon down, which is not an easy thing to do. And from there, we cut back to Madison Square Gardens, and Yoko has lead vocals for Don't Worry, Kyoko, Mummy's only looking for her hand in the snow. Now, I'd heard this on the live piece in Toronto record, and wasn't too impressed. But here, with the value of this remastered sound pumping throughout the cinema, it sounds great. I mean, sure, it's a bit repetitive, but when she's saying "Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry," but that's sort of groundbreaking in its way, because it is really the punk aesthetic here. And I didn't realize that she had such a groove with what she's singing. Really fantastic. And then we go to a phone conversation. We break from there, which is Yoko talking to Dom Bartelli, I believe it was, about acquiring some flies, some live flies. And more on what happens with that later. Instant Karma is the next song, and it sounds absolutely massive, epically coming through the speakers, and watching these performers on stage, John and Yoko behind the piano or behind the keyboard. And I kind of really wish John was behind a Strat and a Les Paul, but that's what happens. And then we go to crowds protesting the Vietnam rallies. And there's John right out in the open, speaking to the people of the protesters who are making this effort. And from there we go to another phone conversation between the legendary drummer Jim Keltner and John, and he raises the idea of possible assassination attempts at this point in time. And John's pretty dismissive of that, but what he does do is he then starts to record all of his phone conversations, because if other people are listening to him, then he may as well have a record of what the conversation was absolutely about. And the filmmakers do something really interesting. They put up these graphics which can show the clicks and pops of obviously somebody else listening on the line. And there's a real irony here between John recording all of his phone conversations and Nixon recording all of his, as the Watergate scandal really sort of blossomed. We then go into Hound Dog, and again, in the hands of a master like Elvis or John, it just goes from a good old rock song to something absolutely amazing. And that cuts then to footage of John Lennon and his court appearance for deportation out of the States. And I don't know if there were lawyers in sight, but there's John on the steps talking with reporters very eloquently, very intelligently, very thoughtfully, and telling his truth, that they don't think there's anything really wrong here. One of the things also I picked up is when they recreated the set of the Greenwich Village apartment that they were staying in. If you look really closely in the record rack, you can see Abbey Road's in there, and later on in the film, Abbey Road's laying on the floor. And there's a potential connection here between Lennon and the Beatles. I mean, was he listening to Abbey Road at that time? I don't know. Or was it just sort of this fantastical flight of whimsy by the directors? Then we've got more flies coming on, except no more Tom Bartelli. This time, Yoko speaking to May Pang. My God, the irony there. And they've found a place where they can find these live flies, but the problem is they won't maybe last over the weekend, and the decision is made to put them in the refrigerator because that'll perk them up a bit. Cold Turkey's up next, and this is an amazing revelatory performance here. Can't see no future, can't see no sky. But the accompanying footage is not, interestingly, about addiction or drugs in any way. Instead, it's Richard Nixon accepting the presidential nomination in 1972, and that's cut in with or juxtaposed with the violence on the streets of Miami. From there, we go to Mother, and the sparseness of this arrangement is really telling. It's exactly the same, or very close to the same sound on Plastic Ono Band, but what we have there is just some drums, a bass note that gets sustained, and Lennon playing on those keyboards. And rather than smashing on the keyboards, what he's doing is sort of pressing inexorably with force on them. And you can see the bitterness and the vitriol in his eyes and on his face. He's chewing his gum. Unbelievable. But then comes the gut punch of the film, and it is footage of the documentary that John and Yoko saw at the time at the Willowbrook Institution on Staten Island, just 15 miles away from Broadway, if you can believe that. And the images that we see of these children, these special needs children, and the lack of care that they're receiving is absolutely devastating. It kind of reminds me of when I was reading The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and the scene in there, you'll know it if you've read it or seen it, of the people being trapped underground. I never saw the film because I did not want to see it past what I saw in my mind's eye, and because I'll never be able to unsee it. And it's very similar with the footage that is in this film as well. And it was from here that John and Yoko organised the one-to-one concert fundraiser and the festival in Central Park. You cut from there to seeing these children, these wonderful children out in the park, going from darkness into lightness, from restriction into freedom. And it's beautiful. There's a moment when these balloons are released into the sky and the looks on the children's faces, like they're seeing something they just cannot believe, is priceless. And it's a wonderful moment where we've gone from the horrors to the hope. Um, then we go into Imagine in the concert, and John's playing that. And the idea of art holding up a mirror to society, and here's John sort of asking us to imagine what would be. And it ties in a bit to Bertolt Brecht, where art is not a mirror to reflect reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. So why did action take so long on this? The institution didn't close until 1987. Then we head to audio of Yoko giving this wonderful speech, a memorable speech with some of the great lines of the film. And she talks about when she came onto the scene as being artistic, creative, and beautiful, and that got her labeled as a witch. But go out with one Beatle and she gets upgraded to a bitch. Horrible stuff. Cutting back, then we go to the one-to-one concert and Give Peace a Chance, where everybody's out on stage singing and leading along this chant, and they've got their plastic military helmets on now. A moment of unity. We're celebrating diversity, not division, that type of idea. And as everybody's singing, John is yelling out, "No more war and no more 4 more years." Anyway, they left their Greenwich Village apartment in March of '73, and a curtain came down on this chapter of their lives, but another one was about to be written with The Lost Weekend. So what are my takeaways from this film? Well, the first is what a dynamic and gifted and amazing, riveting frontman John Lennon was. I never knew it to this degree. I'd always known he was a genius and he wrote brilliant songs and his voice was amazing, but I couldn't take my eyes off him as he's chewing on that gum full of self-confidence and power and charisma, all of these things tied up into one package. And it's criminal almost that we don't have him doing more performances during that period after leaving the Beatles. I wish they were there, but they're not. The second takeaway I have is I was amazed by Yoko Ono and her contribution to this situation. I mean, they're absolutely a perfect partnership. And they were together longer than the Beatles, which is something worth thinking about. And when they broke up, they got back together again. And I can't see John through this period without seeing Yoko as well as a vital contributor and creative partner in this project. I remember where I was when John Lennon died. I was watching sport on TV. I was 15 years old, and the news flash came up, and I was devastated. I had to go and tell everybody that it had occurred. But this film does something else rather than make me sad that he died. I'm glad that he lived. I'm glad that he was able to create conversation and dialectic and change, that he could encourage other people to believe in giving peace a chance. A lot of biographies and documentaries go on to this idea of us grieving for John, but this film is very uplifting, and what a stunning artistic talent he was. And the flies, well, they get used in one of Yoko Ono's artistic statements. Anyway, another thing my takeaway was, thank you, John, and thank you, Yoko. Bye now.